Do you remember what it felt like to wake up to the sun, not a screen? Do you remember when your first instinct wasn't to scroll, but to run barefoot to the yard, the sidewalk, the open air? When was the last time you heard the world before you saw it? The birds, the distant lawnmowers, the neighbor's screen door slamming shut. Stay with me until the end of this video, and you'll remember how it felt to live a morning that began not with buttons or controllers, but with breath and grass and wonder. Because today, I want to tell you what it was like to wake up and run outside without even turning on the TV. Back in the golden, simple days of the 90s, it always started with the sun. Not the blinding kind, but the gentle gold that slipped through the old white curtains in my bedroom window. It would land right on my face, warm and soft, even before my eyes fully opened. There wasn't a buzzing phone on the nightstand, because there wasn't a phone at all. Just a Garfield alarm clock ticking quietly beside my pillow, usually blinking 12 o'clock because someone had unplugged it again. Sometimes I'd hear the faint hum of a lawnmower already at work down the block, or the jingling collar of a dog running loose in someone's yard. But what really woke me up, what pulled me out of bed like magic, was the scent of morning grass, that dukest green smell that slipped through the screen windows and whispered, "Come outside, the world is waiting." Did I ever wonder what cartoons were playing that morning? Not really. I knew the Rugrats or Doug might be on, but they could wait. The real show was happening outside, in the yards and sidewalks, in the secret language of kids on bikes and squirrels, chasing each other across telephone wires. Sometimes I didn't even stop to put shoes on. My feet knew the path too well, across the hardwood floors, down the creaky steps, past the cereal boxes on the kitchen table that still smelled like yesterday's milk. My mom would shout, "At least eat something." But I was already halfway out the door, heart pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of a day that hadn't even begun yet and was already full of possibility. Do you remember what it was like to run without a destination, to feel your body just want to move, not because of a fitness goal or a daily step count, but because joy was waiting behind the fence or under the old maple tree at the corner? I remember it. Chestnut. There were no schedules, no notifications, no plans. The only rule was to come back before the streetlights came on. The rest of the day was ours, and we knew how to fill it. That morning, like so many others, I found my best friend already outside. He lived 3 houses down, and we had this unspoken radar. If one of us was out, the other would sense it. That grin meant adventure. We didn't say, "What are we gonna do today?" because we already knew we were going to be outside. That was enough. Climbing trees, racing bikes, making up stories about spies and hidden treasure in the drainage ditch behind Ms. Laurel's yard. That was the internet. Our imaginations plugged directly into nature, fueled by sunshine and Kool-Aid mustaches. Do you know what it's like to play without an audience? Without a camera? Without a share button? Just 2 kids building forts out of sticks and pretending the backyard hose was a portal to another world. I do. And let me tell you, that feeling, it stays with you. My hands were usually covered in dirt by 9 a.m. We'd build ramps with scrap wood, fall off our bikes, laugh so hard we couldn't breathe, and sometimes cry just as hard when the gravel scraped our knees. but even the pain felt real in a good way, like proof that we were alive, that the world could touch us and we could touch it back. Around mid-morning, we'd find our way to someone's porch, usually Anna's. She always had those Otter Pops in the freezer, the long plastic tubes of sweet, frozen color that stained your lips for hours. We'd sit there, cross-legged and barefoot, the boards warm under us, trading stories and snacks like we were little old folks waiting on the world. Have you ever tasted grape-flavored ice when it's already 90 degrees by 10 o'clock? Have you ever licked a popsicle and watched the purple drip down your elbow while your friends made shadow puppets on the driveway? That was our version of social media, sharing silence, jokes, and plans for the afternoon. And all this before noon, before anyone even thought to turn on the TV. You see, television wasn't forbidden, but it was kind of forgotten. It wasn't the center. It was background noise, like the hum of the fridge or the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. It didn't define us. The world outside did. There was something sacred about not knowing what time it was. Clocks, no watches, just the rhythm of shadows moving slowly across the lawn. We'd know it was lunch when someone's mom called from the front steps, usually holding a sandwich with crusts still on, wrapped in a paper towel. We didn't care. We were starving, and everything tasted better outside. And even then, we didn't go in. We'd sit right there on the porch steps or the grass, eating with one hand while swatting mosquitoes with the other, knees stained green, hair sticking to our foreheads, talking about everything and nothing at all. Do you know what I miss most? Not the toys or the snacks or the lack of bills and responsibilities. It's that sense of presence, that deep, quiet feeling of just being, of having nothing to check, nowhere to scroll, and no need to curate a perfect moment. The moment already was perfect because we were in it. There are no photos, no VHS tapes, no proof other than what's etched into my bones and my heart. But I carry it with me, always. So when I ask you, do you remember what it was like to wake up and run outside without even turning on the TV? I ask because I do, and I hope somewhere inside you do too. Because those mornings were not just the start of the day, they were the start of everything. Imagination, freedom, joy, and the promise of a summer where the only screen was the sky above. There was something different about those mornings once we'd had a taste of freedom and just enough sunlight to make our skin glow with warmth. After the first rush of running barefoot and wild, after the popsicles and peanut butter sandwiches, eaten under trees or on worn-out porch steps, something magical started to happen. Our imaginations took over. It was like the moment our bodies got tired of racing, our minds kicked in and filled the stillness with possibilities. That was when the real stories began. Do you remember turning a simple stick into something more? A sword, a staff, a wand, or a mighty tool for saving the world? Because we did. And to us, every tree branch or broom handle was enchanted, and every backyard became a kingdom that needed defending. That afternoon, after wiping the last bits of jelly off my fingers with the inside of my t-shirt, I found the perfect stick beside the neighbor's fence. It wasn't just a stick, not to me. It was long and slightly curved, light enough to swing, but sturdy enough to make a satisfying thud when it struck something. I remember holding it in my hand and feeling something click inside me. This wasn't just a piece of wood. This was Excalibur. This was the sword of power. This was everything I needed to become something greater. By the time I made it back to the yard, my best friend had already armed himself with a shorter branch, jagged at one end. He held it high above his head and shouted something about defending the eastern wall. And without even needing to discuss it, we both knew what world we were living in now. The lawn had become a vast battlefield. The flower beds turned into watchtowers, and the sandbox was a treacherous pit filled with quicksand and enemy spies. Have you ever looked at your backyard and seen more than just grass and fences? Have you ever seen kingdoms, dragons, and secret tunnels beneath every bush and tree? That's how it was. The yard became our stage, and we were the stars of a tale too grand for any screen to capture. I climbed the rusty swing set and declared it the high tower of Castle Rivenwood. My friend ducked behind the old laundry pole, now transformed into a wizard's spire with powers beyond human comprehension. We gave ourselves titles. I was Sir Orion, the protector of the Emerald Valley, and he was Cedric the Brave, the champion of Windmere Hollow. Sometimes Anna would join in, wearing a curtain tied around her shoulders like a cape, calling herself Lady Seraphina, ruler of the skies. We didn't laugh at each other's names or ideas. We embraced them like sacred truth, because in our world, you didn't need permission to be heroic. You just needed belief. Do you remember how serious we took those stories? How even a plastic Halloween helmet from 3 years ago made you feel invincible again. We didn't need perfect costumes or props. We needed belief and space to play. A cardboard box became a treasure chest. A wheelbarrow was a prison wagon, and the garden hose was a living serpent we had to defeat before sunset. That day, we decided there had been a rebellion in the southern provinces. The squirrels had turned against us and were working with the crows, who had stolen the magical stone hidden in the roots of the maple tree. We planned an ambush near the fence line. Cedric climbed halfway up the doghouse, bow in hand, which was really just a curved stick and a jump rope, while I crawled through the clover, sword gripped tightly in my palm. We whispered back and forth, mimicking the kind of voices we'd heard in fantasy movies late at night when our parents thought we were asleep. When we charged the enemy, there was nothing around us but the wind and our own laughter. We battled invisible foes, shouted made-up spells, fell dramatically onto the grass when hit, only to rise again after a 10-second count. We played until we were drenched in sweat and completely covered in dirt and grass stains. That's how we knew we had done something right. Have you ever looked at your reflection at the end of a long summer afternoon, your face smeared with dirt, your arms scratched, your clothes torn, and thought, I've lived 100 lives today? That's what it felt like. We weren't just children. We were knights, rebels, all before dinner. I remember my mom calling me in from the back porch, holding a towel and shaking her head as she saw my muddy hands and tangled hair. But even she couldn't quite hide her smile. There was something about the way we came home that told her we'd had a good day, the kind of day you don't forget even when you grow older. She would ask, "What did you two get into this time?" And I'd start to tell her, only to realize how impossible it was to explain. How could I describe the battle for the Enchanted Grove, or the chase through the Canyon of Thorns, when to her it was just the neighbor's hedges and the old swing set? Dinner always tasted better after a day like that. Corn on the cob, fish sticks, maybe some baked beans and Kool-Aid in a plastic cup that had probably been microwaved at some point and was now permanently warped. We ate like kings, leaning back in our chairs, legs swinging beneath the table, retelling our adventures in between mouthfuls. And afterward, just when the sky started to blush with those soft summer oranges and purples, we'd head back out again. Not to fight or run or yell this time, but to sit quietly on the curb, looking at the shapes the clouds made. Sometimes we'd still hold our sticks, our swords, but now they rested across our laps, like relics of a war well fought. We didn't talk as much then. We just watched the fireflies blinking in the bushes, listened to the neighbors' screen doors creaking open, smelled someone's barbecue from a few houses away, and felt the world wind down with us. Do you remember what it was like to feel completely satisfied with a day that costs nothing? To feel as if the air itself had given you everything you needed to feel full and free. I do, and I remember thinking, even then, that I never wanted it to end. As the streetlights began to flicker on, casting soft halos on the pavement, our parents called our names, one by one, like distant lighthouses summoning ships home. We stood, yawned, stretched, and parted ways without saying much. We didn't need to. We'd see each other again in the morning. We always did. Inside, I washed up in the old green-tiled bathroom, scrubbing my hands under the water until the dirt finally gave in. I remember looking at myself in the mirror, freckles, sunburnt nose, a little scrape on my chin, and smiling, because I wasn't just me. I was Sir Orion, victorious again. And as I lay in bed that night, the windows cracked open to let in the sound of crickets and the faraway hum of a passing car. I kept the stick beside me on the floor, just in case tomorrow brought more dragons, more battles, more kingdoms to defend. Because to us, every piece of wood was a sword, and every yard was a castle, and we were the ones who ruled them all. The morning after our last battle, I woke up with the same quiet excitement in my chest, the kind that feels like a whisper, like the universe leaning in to say, today will be special. The stick that had been my sword still rested beside my bed, but I had a different plan this time. It wasn't a day for war. It was a day for discovery. It started with a map. I found it folded between pages of an old National Geographic magazine that my dad had kept in a stack near the back door. It was yellowed, soft at the edges, and covered in winding lines and tiny names I couldn't pronounce. My eyes lit up as I ran my finger along the faded paper, tracing what I decided was the route to a hidden treasure buried deep beneath our town. Of course, it wasn't just a map anymore. It was a key, a secret tool that would guide us across deserts, oceans, and through time itself. Have you ever believed, with every cell in your body, that the adventure you were about to have was real? That you could become anything if you just committed hard enough to the idea? That was us. I stuffed the map in a backpack, grabbed a pillowcase full of essentials, a flashlight, a bag of pretzel sticks, my sister's magnifying glass, and a worn-out compass from a cereal box prize, and headed outside. The sky was wide and blue, the kind that feels like it's cheering for you. I met Cedric by the driveway. He had his backpack too, and he'd stolen one of his dad's floppy fishing hats, which made him look exactly like the kind of explorer you'd see in those dusty adventure books from the library. Anna joined us soon after, dragging behind her a red wagon filled with tools we didn't need but insisted were critical: a plastic spyglass, a broken walkie-talkie, and an old tin lunchbox filled with paper clips and buttons that she called our treasure fund. Do you remember how just a bedsheet and a wild idea were enough to build new worlds? We tied one of my mom's old floral sheets between two trees in the backyard and crouched beneath it. It was our base camp, our ship, our time portal. From there, we declared that we were no longer in the neighborhood at all. No, we were sailing the lost sea of Saranda in search of the skeleton coast, where pirate ghosts were rumored to guard a chest filled with rubies that could bend time. Itself, Cedric pulled out a paper towel tube and peered through it like a telescope, scanning the yard for threats. "I see movement on the western cliffs," he whispered, pointing toward the garden hose and the row of hedges behind it. I gasped. Could it be the moss giants again? Anna nodded gravely. They've returned. We packed the wagon with supplies and dragged it across the lawn, taking cautious steps and warning each other about sudden quicksand patches or lightning traps. We spoke in hushed, urgent tones, like archaeologists in a forgotten ruin. At one point, a squirrel darted across the yard and sent us all diving behind the bushes, convinced it was a guardian spirit protecting the path to the treasure. Do you know the thrill of believing so fully in something imaginary that it becomes more vivid than the world around you? In our minds, we were crawling through abandoned temples, avoiding crumbling stone floors, and deciphering ancient symbols carved into the patio bricks. Our adventures shifted moment to moment. 1 hour we were pirates, shouting commands and swinging sticks like cutlasses, chasing each other around the garden while yelling things like "prepare to be boarded" and "walk the plank." The next, we were time travelers, using the laundry basket as a time pod, spinning the dials of an old calculator to set the date and destination. We landed in medieval times once. A thunderstorm had passed through the night before, leaving behind puddles and muddy paths that we quickly declared were from the moat of the cursed Black Keep. The swing set became a castle tower, and the sandbox transformed into a medieval town square where villagers were secretly wizards in disguise. Later that afternoon, we traveled to the future, the year 2999. We wrapped aluminum foil around our arms and declared that the lawn chairs were laser tanks. Cedric put sunglasses on over the foil helmet he made from an old mixing bowl. I remember laughing so hard my stomach hurt, especially when Anna tried to speak in robot voice and couldn't stop hiccuping. The best part, we didn't need anything fancy to bring it all to life. Just our voices, our trust in each other, and the absolute freedom to play without being watched, recorded, or judged. There was no script, no pressure to be funny or clever or cool. We just were, and that was more than enough. Do you remember what it was like to play for hours without once looking at a clock? Time didn't matter to us. We only noticed it when the shadows grew long, and our parents began calling out from porches and doorways, one voice at a time. That's when we'd pack up the wagon, fold the map, and promise to meet again at the same time, same place. We never said goodbye. We just said to be continued. Back inside, I'd dump the contents of my pillowcase on the bedroom floor and examine each item like an artifact. A pebble I'd found in the garden became a sacred relic. The pretzel crumbs were evidence of survival. I'd fold the map with care and slide it beneath my pillow, just in case I needed to escape again in the middle of the night. As the house quieted and the television hummed softly from the living room, I'd lie in bed and think back on the places we'd been. The past, the future, lost islands, sunken ships, hidden temples, and faraway planets, all from the comfort of our yard. Because we didn't need plane tickets, game consoles, or screens. We just needed each other, a bedsheet, and a crazy idea. That was the magic of being a kid in the 90s. We weren't bound by what was real. We were only limited by how far we were willing to imagine. The next morning began with a rumble, not from the sky, but from my chest. That quiet, pulsing kind of thrill that made me jump out of bed before my mom even called for breakfast. I tied my shoelaces in a hurry, skipped the cartoons playing softly in the living room, and ran straight to the garage, heart thudding like a drumline. There, leaning against the far wall between a rake and a half-deflated beach ball, was my most trusted companion, my bike. It wasn't just any bike. To someone else, it might have looked like a scratched-up Huffy with chipped paint and a seat that squeaked every time you hit a bump. But to me, it was a spaceship, a race car, a rocket bound for unexplored galaxies. The foam pad on the handlebar had a lightning bolt on it, and my dad had once added plastic zip ties to the spokes so they clicked as the wheels spun, sounding like a tiny engine revving up. That sound alone was enough to launch me into another world. Have you ever had something so simple make you feel so powerful? That day, we were going to race, not just for fun, but because the fate of our imaginary planet depended on it. Cedric arrived first, already on his bike, feet hovering over the pedals, his helmet crooked on his head, and his eyes full of fire. He wore a red windbreaker that flapped like a cape, and his shoelaces trailed dangerously close to the chain. But he didn't care. He pointed at the crack in the sidewalk near Mrs. Bellamy's hedge. That's the starting gate. The race to Saturn begins now, he declared. I nodded. First one past the big oak tree near the corner wins. Loser has to guard the space station tonight. Anna pulled up next, riding a purple bike with flower stickers peeling off the frame. She had tied 2 scarves to the handlebars, and as she rode, they fluttered behind her like comet tails. She had duct-taped a calculator to her handlebar, which she claimed was our interstellar GPS. We lined up our bikes side by side at the imaginary launch pad, backs straight, legs tense, hands gripping rubber grips faded from years of sun and rain. The sidewalk before us stretched like a silver ribbon, winding past hedges and driveways, across sun-drenched lawns and under telephone lines that buzzed with morning life. 3, 2, 1. Lift, OFF. We shot forward, tires humming against the concrete wind whipping our cheeks. And for a moment, we weren't on Earth anymore. We were cutting through the atmosphere, dodging asteroids, flying past rings of light and ancient stars. Every driveway we passed was a crater, every mailbox a fallen satellite from another mission. We weaved and swerved, shouted warnings, and called out points of interest. There's a black hole near the Peterson's bird bath. Watch out for meteor showers. Warp speed past the manhole cover. Each pedal was a mission, a push through enemy territory, or into a cloud of space dust. When we rounded the curve near the end of the block, My bike hit a small bump and caught air for just a second. In that second, I truly felt like I was flying. Not just in pretend, but really flying. No gravity, no weight, just the pure rush of movement and wonder. Do you remember what it felt like to ride until your legs burned, until your hands went numb from gripping too tight, but you didn't want to stop? We did that every day, and we never got tired, because we weren't just riding. We were escaping, exploring, chasing down galaxies no adult could ever find on a map. Once we finished the race, we parked near the fire hydrant and laid back on the cool grass, helmets tossed aside, breathing hard, laughing louder. The sky above us stretched forever. Anna said she could see Mars, even though it was the middle of the day. Cedric pointed out a cloud shaped like a spaceship, and I just smiled, letting the sweat dry on my forehead while my mind drifted back into orbit. But our day wasn't over, not even close. After a short break and a sip from the garden hose, which no matter how clean it looked, always tasted like rubber and sunlight, we set off again. This time, we weren't astronauts. We were race champions. The sidewalk became a track, not a simple circle, but a complex course full of challenges. We made ramps with leftover planks from someone's fence repairs. We drew chalk arrows to mark sharp turns, zigzags, and danger zones. We even had pit stops, which were just plastic, chairs where one of us would pretend to tighten bolts or hand over imaginary water bottles. Do you remember turning a quiet neighborhood into the Indianapolis 500? We rode in loops, timed each other, and created elaborate backstories. Anna had won 6 grand championships in a row and was known as the Queen of Speed. Cedric was a rebel racer from another dimension. I was the underdog, the one with nothing to lose and everything to prove. We played out our stories like a movie only we could see. Eventually, we invited other kids to join. Soon, there were 5, then 7 of us, circling the block like a swarm of bees. Some had banana seats, others had pegs on the back. One kid had a bell that he rang every time he passed someone. It didn't matter what our bikes looked like or how fast they were. What mattered was that we were out there, together, alive and laughing and full of stories. As the sun began to tilt toward late afternoon, our shadows stretched across the pavement. Our tires wore thin paths into the dirt patches by the curbs. We took turns pretending to crash and fall, dramatically sliding across the grass and calling for help. We raced with no real finish line, just the joy of motion, of being seen, of being part of something that only existed because we believed in it. And when we finally slowed, muscles aching, hands smudged with grease from fallen chains and adjustments made with sticks and pennies, we parked our ships, our cars, our everything back in the garage or beside the porch. We said nothing at first, just smiled, because we knew what we had done. We had traveled across planets and conquered impossible laps, all without leaving the sidewalk that night. After my bath and my bowl of macaroni and cheese, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked out the window. The street was quiet. A few porch lights glowed faintly. Somewhere, someone's sprinkler hissed. But my bike sat there under the porch light, resting like a soldier after a long journey. I whispered, "Good night, Voyager," and turned off the lamp, because tomorrow we'd ride again, and the mission would be even bigger. By the middle of that week, After racing through sidewalks and sailing across imaginary galaxies, we began to slow down. Not because we were tired of playing, but because the heat started to settle heavier in the afternoons, clinging to our backs, like invisible backpacks. It was the kind of heat that made the pavement shimmer and the breeze feel like warm breath. So we looked up, as we always did when our energy ran low, and we found our next adventure waiting in the branches. There was a tree at the end of the street, past the split in the sidewalk where 2 blocks met and the grass grew a little wilder. It stood tall beside an old fence, its roots cracking the concrete nearby, its limbs stretched wide like welcoming arms. No one knew who it belonged to exactly. It just was. A silent guardian of childhood, a meeting place, a throne, we called it the Sky Tree. It wasn't the tallest tree in town, but to us, it touched the clouds. Its bark was rough but easy to grip. The lower branches formed a kind of natural ladder, and once you got high enough, the world below stopped mattering quite as much. I climbed it first that day, with Cedric right behind me, his sneakers scraping the trunk, his breathing slow and focused. Anna was already there, perched on the 3rd highest branch, hugging her knees and staring into the horizon like a philosopher. Do you remember how different everything looked from the top of a tree? From up there, our houses seemed tiny. The roofs, we knew so well from the ground, looked like pieces of a puzzle. The roads were lazy gray rivers, and the people walking dogs or mowing lawns were like wind-up toys going about their silent routines. But in the tree, time shifted. It stretched and softened. We didn't speak right away. We just sat, side by side, legs dangling or curled beneath us, and let the world shrink below. Cedric picked at the peeling bark. What do you think we'll be when we grow up? Anna didn't answer right away. She was chewing on a piece of dried grass and squinting at the sky. I looked out too, letting the sun flicker through the leaves and warm my cheeks. I don't know, I said. Maybe an astronaut or a writer or something nobody's invented yet. Anna finally replied, her voice thoughtful. I want to be someone who doesn't forget how this feels. That stuck with me more than anything else that day, because deep down, I think we all knew we were collecting something in that tree, a kind of invisible treasure we couldn't carry in our pockets. It was understanding, peace, a memory in the making. Do you remember what it felt like to have conversations that drifted like clouds? We didn't rush. We let the wind do the talking when we ran out of words. Sometimes we whispered secrets into the leaves, hoping the tree would keep them safe. Other times we made up stories about the people we saw walking by below, pretending they were characters in our invisible book. We wondered where airplanes went when they disappeared behind the clouds. We talked about dreams that made no sense and fears we didn't quite know how to name. I think my dog is gonna die soon, Cedric said once, quietly. None of us laughed or shrugged it off. We just let the silence stretch long enough for it to feel respectful. Anna nodded and said, mine did last year. It still hurts. But I think she's on the moon now. That became part of our belief system after that. Pets went to the moon when they died. Not in a sad way, but in a special one. They bounced gently between craters and howled at the stars. We created a whole story around it, right there in the branches, with moondog castles and bone-shaped clouds. Have you ever found a place where you felt like nothing could touch you? That's what that tree was. A bubble above reality. When school was too loud, when grown-ups argued, or when the world just didn't make sense, the tree waited. It didn't judge or ask anything of us. It gave us shade, a breeze, and the safety of height. We felt older there, but never rushed. We felt young, but not helpless. We carved our initials into one of the branches, not deep, just enough to make a mark. It was our quiet promise to come back, to not forget, to be those people again someday, even if everything else changed. And when it got too hot, or the bugs found us, or our legs went numb from sitting too long, we'd slowly climb back down, not quickly, not carelessly. Climbing down always felt more serious than going up. It meant returning to the world, to the hum of cars, and the calls of parents, and the sound of someone's sprinkler hitting the sidewalk in rhythmic bursts. But even on the ground, we carried the feeling with us. That perspective, that slowness, that peace. Do you know what it's like to talk about life when you don't yet know what life really is? It's honest, it's innocent, it's full of wonder and guesses and wide open space. We talked about love without knowing what it meant. We talked about death like it was a doorway. We talked about forever in terms of school years and summer breaks, and none of it was wrong. That evening, after dinner, I walked past the tree again alone. The sun was setting behind it, making the leaves glow like fire. I stopped and looked up. I could still see the spot where we'd sat, the carved bark catching the light. And I whispered, "Don't forget me," because part of me believed the tree would remember, that it had soaked up our words and would keep them safe, just like the secrets we'd told it. That night, I dreamed I was back up there. Only this time, the branches stretched even higher, above the clouds, above the stars. I climbed without fear, hand over hand, heart calm, the wind cool against my skin. And when I reached the top, I saw everything, not just the neighborhood, but the years to come. And in the dream, I wasn't scared of growing up, because I knew I could always come back to the tree, to that time, to that feeling. The next day felt different. Maybe it was the breeze that carried the scent of cut grass through every corner of the neighborhood. Or maybe it was the way the sun beamed just right through the leaves, casting shadows that danced like whispers on the pavement. Whatever it was, something about that morning told us it wasn't a day for climbing or racing or pretending to fly through space. It was a day for building and not just anything. We were going to create something that would test our bravery, challenge our limits, and settle once and for all who among us had the heart of a true champion. The idea started with one old tire. It had been sitting in the corner of Cedric's backyard for as long as I could remember, half buried in dirt and leaves. I don't even think it came from a real car, probably a lawn tractor or something long forgotten. But to us, it was more than rubber and rust. It was the first piece of what would become the greatest backyard obstacle course in the entire history of childhood. Do you remember the feeling of creating something out of nothing? We ran through our yards, gathering materials. 2 more tires appeared, one behind Anna's garage, and another from a neighbor who said we could have it as long as we didn't hurt ourselves. We took garden hoses and stretched them in zigzags across the lawn like laser beams. We found buckets, crates, broomsticks, cones, old planks, hula hoops, a kiddie pool, and even the inflatable alligator that had a slow leak but still floated, just enough to be part of the course. Each item found its purpose. The tires were for hopping through, fast and light, without tripping. The hose tunnels had to be army crawled under elbows and knees, digging into the dirt. The broomsticks became hurdles balanced between bricks. The hula hoop was the portal. You had to spin it 3 times before continuing. The kiddie pool was lava, and you had to cross it using only 2 upside-down frisbees as stepping stones. And the final challenge, jumping from the last wooden plank into the arms of victory, which was really just the old lawn chair under the oak tree. But we made a cardboard crown and declared it the throne of champions. Do you remember how serious it all felt? How rules mattered and cheating was the worst crime imaginable. We spent more time designing the course than actually running it. That was the magic. We didn't need it to be perfect. We needed it to belong to us. Every twist, every turn, every uneven patch of grass was a decision. And once it was ready, we stood side by side, hands on hips, sweat already forming at our temples, staring at our creation with pride. Cedric went first. He was quick through the tires, stumbled a bit on the hurdles, and belly flopped into the pool with such commitment that even Anna gave him bonus points for style. She followed, graceful and fast, but knocked over a cone during her hula hoop spin. I laughed until I cried watching her try to balance on a frisbee that kept flipping over. Then it was my turn. My legs shook slightly as I took position at the start. We'd taken a plastic toy trumpet and used it as the starting horn. Cedric gave it a half-hearted toot, and I was off. The tires slapped under my sneakers. The hose tunnel scratched my arms. The hurdles loomed taller than I expected. I cleared 1, 2, then clipped the 3rd with my foot and tumbled forward into the grass, rolling to my feet without stopping. Anna cheered. Go, 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 go. I spun the hoop once, twice, 3 times, jumped the frisbees like they were rocks in a river, and finally dove onto the lawn chair with a thud that knocked the cardboard crown into the dirt. I lay there, panting, arms spread wide, and felt something I still remember today. A perfect mix of joy, exhaustion, and quiet pride. Have you ever felt like you accomplished something no one else will ever fully understand? That's what that day was. Not just a game, not just a backyard full of junk. It was proof that our minds could make magic, that with enough imagination and old tires, we could build our own Olympics, our own hero's journey. We spent the rest of the afternoon perfecting the course, moving things around, adding new rules. You had to shout your superhero name before starting. You had to make animal sounds during the final lap. We added a timekeeper role and let the stopwatch from Anna's dad's fishing gear do the honors, even though it was stuck on 1 minute and 22 seconds and never changed at one point. Even Cedric's little sister wanted to join. She was only 5, and she insisted on wearing fairy wings and holding a stick with glitter tape on it. We let her go last, and we cheered louder than ever as she waddled through every obstacle with the seriousness of someone on a real quest, because, in her eyes, it wasn't pretend, it mattered. Do you remember cheering for someone just because they were trying? That kind of support didn't come from competition. It came from being part of something together, from seeing someone else light up the same way you did and feeling lucky to be a part of it. When the sun began to lower and the shadows stretched across the lawn, we didn't take the course apart. We left it there, like a monument, like a reminder. Our parents would probably clean it up the next morning, but for that night, it stood as proof that we had turned a backyard into an arena, into a stage, into something far bigger than the space it took up. That evening, lying on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and a fan buzzing in the corner, I kept thinking about the moment I had leaped onto that chair and heard my friends cheer, and I realized it wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about building something with your own two hands, about imagining a world, inviting others into it, and living inside that world together, even if just for an afternoon. That night, I dreamt of running the course again, but this time it stretched for miles, through neighborhoods, forests, beaches, rooftops, and we ran it together, older, taller, but still laughing, still cheering, still believing, because once you learn how to turn a pile of junk into a champion's trial, you never stop seeing the world that way. After all the running, climbing, and building, there came a day when everything slowed down. The air was thick with that kind of warm stillness that only happens after a rain, when the grass is extra green, the ground is soft under your feet, and the sky is a soft gray instead of its usual blue. We didn't need bikes or ramps that day. We didn't race or shout. Something about the quiet pulled us down to the earth itself. And that's where the magic began. The backyard had transformed overnight. Puddles filled the low spots like little lakes. The dirt by the fence had turned into soft brown clay, and the corners of the yard where grass never really grew were now perfect playgrounds for creation. That was when we became chefs, gardeners, builders of tiny civilizations. Near the side of Anna's house, where the shade kept the ground from drying too quickly, Cedric brought out an old plastic mixing bowl that had probably once belonged to his sandbox set. Anna carried 2 cracked plates from her toy kitchen. I found a metal spoon buried in the garage, slightly bent, but perfect for scooping just the right amount of muddy batter. We got to work like it was our job. We started with the basics, a mixture of dirt and water, stirred until it was thick but not soupy. We called it chocolate fudge batter, even though it smelled nothing like chocolate. We pressed it into plastic bowls, patted the tops flat, and decorated the surface with pebbles, flower petals, and broken twigs. Each creation had a name. The first one was the Royal Garden Pie. Cedric made the Swamp Surprise, which oozed green from crushed leaves and dandelion stems. Anna created what she proudly called the Queen's birthday cake, topping it with an acorn crown and sprinkling it with crushed pine needles. She insisted were magic herbs. Have you ever cooked something entirely from pretend and still felt like a master chef? That's exactly how it felt. We set up a restaurant by the garden hose, using overturned buckets as tables. I took everyone's orders with a notepad torn from my math homework, asking very serious questions, like, would you like your mud pie with extra stick garnish? And would you prefer your leaf salad tossed or crushed? Cedric played the role of the overly dramatic customer who sent his food back 3 times because the texture wasn't crunchy enough. Anna, on the other hand, insisted on speaking with a British accent and demanded to see the royal chef. When the novelty of cooking wore off, we turned to something deeper, something even quieter. We began building worlds. We used the same patches of dirt but carved out rivers with our hands, outlining roads with rocks and fences made from broken twigs. We made houses from leaves, gates from blades of grass, and even dug a tunnel with a spoon that led to what we decided was an underground treasure vault. Do you remember what it was like to build something tiny and believe it was real? In our minds, those little villages were alive. We gave the towns names like Pebbleton and Leafville. We assigned each home to a tiny imaginary creature. Cedric said his house belonged to a mole who was also a detective. Anna insisted hers was the castle of a fairy who only appeared during thunderstorms. I made a bridge over a puddle and declared it the only safe crossing to the land of the 7 mushrooms. We spent hours adding to those little worlds. Each time the wind blew or a bird flew overhead, we paused, convinced that nature itself was watching and approving of our work. It was quiet joy, the kind that doesn't make you laugh out loud. The stick balanced across 2 small rocks without falling. Later that afternoon, he tried to help, but he stepped on one of the twig fences and crushed it. At first, we all gasped. It felt like someone had knocked over a real building. But then he looked up with wide eyes and said, "Sorry, was it the bakery?" And just like that, we made him the mayor. We rebuilt the bakery with double the flowers on the roof. Do you remember the joy of letting someone new into your world, even after they broke something? Forgiveness came easily, then so did laughter, so did the desire to keep building, to keep shaping the dirt and leaves into something meaningful, something beautiful, even if it would all be gone by tomorrow. As the sun dipped lower and the light shifted golden, we started to close up shop. The mud pies sat in a perfect row on the porch railing, drying in the last heat of the day like sacred offerings. Our hands were filthy, our fingernails caked with dirt, and our knees looked like we'd been rolling in paint. But we were proud. We had built something from nothing. We washed off with the hose, shrieking when the water hit our arms, cold and sudden. It sprayed muddy rivers across the yard, washing away bits of our tiny world. But we didn't mind. We had lived it. That was enough that night. As I lay in bed and the ceiling fan hummed above me, I thought about the miniature village. I imagined the twig fences standing strong through the night, the mud pies drying perfectly round, and the invisible creatures lighting their tiny lanterns beneath the leaves. And I thought, maybe when we grow up, we don't stop making things. Maybe we just forget how to do it with mud and sticks and love. Some evenings felt different. You could sense it in the stillness of the air, in the way the sky slowly melted from gold into lavender, and then into that deep, dusky blue. There was a hush that came over everything, like the world was gently leaning in to listen. On those nights, we didn't run or build or ride. We gathered, and when we gathered, we told stories. Not just any stories, but the spooky kind. The ones that made your skin prickle and your shoulders hunch just a little without you realizing it. The ones that made you laugh nervously, pretend you weren't scared, and glance over your shoulder once or twice just to be sure. Do you remember what it was like to scare yourself on purpose, just for the thrill of it? We always chose the same spot for our storytelling, the backyard behind Cedric's house. His family had this big old oak tree that looked even bigger at night, its branches gnarled like fingers reaching across the sky. We'd sit in a circle at the base of it, surrounded by dry grass, a couple of flashlights with dying batteries, and the sound of cicadas in the distance. Someone always brought a blanket, but it was more for comfort than for warmth. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, the first fireflies would begin to flicker. One, then two, then dozens. They hovered low over the grass like little lanterns, blinking in and out of existence. We never tried to catch them on those nights. Catching would have broken the spell. We let them float among us like silent watchers of our tales. Anna usually started. She had a soft voice that got quieter the scarier the story got, which somehow made it worse. She told us about a girl who disappeared into her closet and came out in another version of her house, where her family had no eyes and only spoke in whispers. Cedric followed with his usual favorite, the ghost of the railroad worker who still walked the tracks behind the old elementary school, dragging his broken lantern and looking for his missing head. I never thought I'd be good at scary stories, but that summer I tried one. I told them about the shadow that lived in the mirror. Not the bathroom mirror, but the one in the attic. The one nobody looked into too long, because if you stared long enough, it started to reflect things that weren't really behind you. I remember how quiet it got when I said that. The fireflies slowed. The wind picked up just enough to rustle the leaves above our heads. And for a moment, even I believed it. Do you remember when stories weren't just entertainment, but doorways? We weren't just sitting in a backyard. We were inside the tales. Every creak of a fence, every distant bark, every rustling of leaves became part of the experience. Our imaginations were on full alert, stretched to their edges, painting worlds more vivid than anything on TV. It wasn't about gore or monsters. It was about suggestion, feeling, the kind of fear that tickled your spine and made you scoot a little closer to your friends. Sometimes, after a really good story, none of us spoke for a minute. We just sat in the glow of it. The fireflies blinked. Between us, the flashlights flickered, and the night deepened into something thicker, something almost sacred. And of course, every single time, someone had to take it too far. Usually, Cedric. He would sneak behind the tree while someone else was talking and jump out right at the scariest part, yelling at the top of his lungs and making us all scream and scatter like marbles. It was tradition. We'd yell at him, laugh, then swear revenge, only to be scared again next time. Have you ever loved being afraid just because you knew you were safe? That was the beauty of it. We knew the stories weren't real, but we let them feel real. We let ourselves believe just enough to feel the rush, the excitement, the quiet awe that comes from facing something unknown, even if it was only pretend. Eventually, one of our moms would call out from the back porch, her voice cutting through the dark like a reminder that we still belonged to the real world. That was always our signal. We'd gather up the flashlights, fold the blanket, and walk home together in pairs, too proud to admit we were still a little spooked. The walk home was always different after a story night. The streetlights felt colder. The shadows looked longer. A bush that we passed every day now seemed to hide something. The neighborhood was the same, but our eyes had changed. Our minds were still half in the story world, half in reality. And that space in between, that quiet in between, felt like a spell that would last until morning. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the shadow in the attic mirror. I didn't have an attic, but that didn't stop the idea from lingering. I turned over and faced the wall, just in case. Do you remember telling yourself you weren't scared, even when you were? I whispered to the darkness, saying it out loud like a secret only I needed to hear. It's just a story. But even as I said it, a tiny part of me wasn't so sure. And honestly, I liked that part, that little sliver of maybe. It kept the magic alive. Because stories told at sunset, with fireflies dancing and friends huddled close, weren't meant to disappear. When the night ended, they stayed with us in the corners of our rooms, in the quiet between thoughts, in the spaces where imagination and memory blur. There was always a moment just before the day ended, just before the sun finally disappeared behind the rooftops, when everything felt slow, like the world was exhaling. You could feel it in the way the shadows stretched across the sidewalks, in the way your body moved more slowly, your thoughts softening like the sky. It was the part of the day that didn't belong to adventure or games anymore. It belonged to the walk home, not a dramatic walk, not a tired one, a satisfied walk. A walk with grass stuck to your socks and dirt caked behind your knees. That kind of full that doesn't need explaining. I remember walking back through the side gate after a long summer day, and the quiet creak it made, not loud enough to wake anyone, but loud enough to feel like home. My shoes were untied, one, and something that might have been popsicle juice, and my face wore the kind of smile that only comes from real joy. Of it, my mom would usually spot me first. She didn't have to ask where I'd been. She'd shake her head with a kind of quiet amusement and say something like, "What did you get into this time?" And I never really knew how to answer. How do you describe that kind of magic in just a few words? So I'd just shrugged, say nothing really, just playing. She'd smile, hand me a towel, and point toward the bathroom. The mirror always surprised me. I'd catch a glimpse of my own face and hardly recognize it. My cheeks sun-kissed, a little red from laughing, too hard. A scrape near my chin I hadn't noticed before. Dirt smudged across my forehead like war paint. Negotiation to comb through later. But there was something else in that reflection, something brighter than all the grime and sweat. Wild, happy, worn in the best way. Do you remember looking in the mirror and seeing a version of yourself that felt like the realest version there was? I'd wash up in the little bathroom with the frog-shaped soap dispenser and the chipped blue tile. I'd scrub my hands until the dirt ran down the drain. Watch as the day's adventures melted away and feel lighter somehow. Like the cleanup was part of the magic too. Dinner would be waiting, usually something simple. Spaghetti, grilled cheese, or baked chicken with mashed potatoes. Food that filled your belly and made you feel like you'd earned it. And I always ate a little slower on days like that, savoring every bite, leaning back in the chair, letting the stories of the day play out in my head like a private movie. Sometimes my parents would ask questions, but they didn't press too hard. They knew that childhood wasn't always something you could explain. And if you came home with dirty clothes and a heart full of laughter, then you had done it right. After dinner, there was always that quiet time, the slow unwind, maybe a few minutes of a TV show we all liked, something with a laugh track and canned applause. Maybe just the buzz of the fan in the corner and the sound of the ice cream truck faintly passing down another street. Damp hair from a quick bath and sore muscles in the best places, the kind of soreness that reminded you that you'd done something, that you'd been somewhere, even if you never left the block. And I'd fall asleep before my mind could even finish replaying the day. Do you remember falling asleep? With the kind of tired that only childhood could bring. The treehouse had secret passages. The bikes had rocket boosters. The mud pies had real frosting. And the ghosts we invented. They danced with us. And I woke up the next morning with grass still tangled in my hair, one sock missing, and a faint streak of dirt on my shoulder that I had somehow missed the night before. The messy hair, the stained clothes, they weren't messes, they were medals, proof that I had lived, proof that I had laughed, played, explored, and tasted the world in all its dusty, sticky, sunburned glory. And to me, there was no greater prize. There is a kind of quiet that falls when the day finally surrenders to night. It is soft and gentle, like a whispered promise. When you're a child in the 90s, that quiet comes not just from the darkness outside, but from the stillness inside. The kind of calm that only arrives after a day spent running, dreaming, and imagining without end. I remember climbing into bed that last night, the kind of night when your body aches in all the right places and your mind feels full yet free. The sheets smelled faintly of fresh laundry and something comforting that I could never quite name. Maybe the lingering scent of the day's adventures, or maybe just the warmth of home. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead, its hum a steady rhythm that seemed to lull the world into rest. Do you remember falling asleep with no screens lighting up your face? No buzzing notifications pulling you back to a digital world that didn't yet exist. It was just me, my thoughts, and the endless sky of my imagination. No buzzing phones, no flashing colors or reminders. Just the steady pulse of my own breath, the quiet of a room wrapped in shadows, and the memory of everything that had happened that day. I thought about the sun on my face as I woke up, about the dirt under my nails, about the thrill of turning sticks into swords and yards into castles. I thought about climbing the highest branches of that oak tree with my friends and telling stories under the flicker of fireflies, the kind of stories that made your skin tingle and your heart beat a little faster. And I thought about the mud pies, the obstacle courses, the bikes that were spaceships, and the smiles worn wide and proud at the end of it all. Have you ever been so grateful for a day that felt like it was made just for you? That was how I felt. Grateful, not because something extraordinary happened, but because something ordinary felt extraordinary. Because a day without screens, without distractions, was a day where imagination did all the work. It was a day full of freedom, of creation, of being fully alive in a world that we built ourselves. Moment by moment, I felt the kind of peace that comes only when you've truly lived, when you've let yourself wander into the wild places of your mind and heart, and come back, the kind of peace that makes you want to close your eyes slowly, knowing that tomorrow will bring more adventures, more stories, more games played with scraped knees and tangled hair, more days where the only limit was the sky, and the only soundtrack was the sound of friends laughing, the rustle of leaves, and the quiet hum of summer. Do you remember dreaming like that? Dreaming with your whole body and soul? As sleep began to wrap around me, I whispered a silent thank you. Thank you for the sunlight, for the grass stains, for the endless sky. Thank you for the friends who made every moment a story worth telling. Thank you for the magic of a day where nothing else mattered but imagination. And as I drifted off, I knew that the next morning would come just as bright and full of possibility, that the world outside would still be waiting, wide open and ready for whatever we chose to make of it. No screens, no distractions, just the endless, beautiful freedom of childhood, and the promise that tomorrow the adventure would start all over again.